There is a language that power speaks without words. It is written in stone, in floor plans, in the quiet authorization of a demolition crew. In the final days of May 2026, that language was spoken at Windsor, and its meaning was unmistakable. A directive, issued from within the administrative machinery of the Crown Estate, has set in motion something that no public statement, no carefully worded palace briefing, and no royal correspondent had managed to fully predict. The structural dismantling of Frogmore Cottage. Not a renovation. Not a repurposing. A reversal, brick by brick, beam by beam, of every physical trace that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle left behind on British soil. For years, the cottage stood as a question the institution refused to answer. As long as its walls remained configured to receive a Sussex family, the door to reconciliation, however theoretical, however remote, remained technically open. That door has now been taken off its hinges. The approved plan is surgical in its symbolism. What was once unified, reshaped at enormous expense into a single, sweeping family home, will be subdivided back into separate staff quarters. The sprawling floor plan, the product of a renovation that drew £2.4 million from the sovereign grant, will be methodically unwound. The institution is not merely reclaiming the property. It is reclaiming the narrative. Senior palace insiders have taken to describing King Charles III's authorization of this project in a particular way. They call it a silent, unappealable executive decree. No press release. No announcement. Just engineers, surveyors, and the slow, deliberate machinery of institutional closure. The global press corps, those who have spent years reading meaning into every vehicle entering Windsor's private roads, now has its answer. The Crown has stopped waiting. To understand the full weight of what is being erased, you have to go back to where it began. To 2018. To a moment of gilded optimism that, in hindsight, carried the first hairline cracks of everything that would follow. When the late Queen Elizabeth II presented Frogmore Cottage to the newly married Duke and Duchess of Sussex, it was offered as a gift and received as a promise. At the time, the property was divided into 5 semi-detached residences, functional and modest, used to house estate workers and Crown staff. What came next was anything but modest. A state-funded architectural overhaul transformed the building entirely. Historic ceiling beams were replaced. Electrical grids were rewired from scratch. New gas and water systems were installed throughout. The interior, overseen by Vicky Charles of Soho House, reflected every dimension of the Sussex brand. A private yoga studio, soundproofed flooring, eco-friendly vegan paint, and a £5,000 copper bathtub that became, almost immediately, a lightning rod for public fury. The message embedded in every design choice was clear. This was not a stopgap. This was a home built for a dynasty. It was occupied for less than 2 years. When Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step back as working royals in early 2020 and ultimately settled in Montecito, California, Frogmore Cottage was left behind, vast, guarded, and largely silent. Harry later reimbursed the Crown the full £2.4 million for the renovations. But money, it turns out, was never really the point. The property remained a wound in the public consciousness, a monument to expenditure, to broken promises, to a rupture that neither side had ever fully addressed. For 3 years it functioned as little more than an expensive storage facility. The couple returned occasionally for the Platinum Jubilee, for the Queen's funeral, but never to stay. The house waited, as institutions often do, with infinite, impassive patience. That patience has now expired. What is happening at Home Park, Windsor, is not estate management. It is the physical enactment of a decision that has long been made in private. The erasure of the Sussexes' last structural claim to a life in Britain. The final administrative chapter of a story that began with a wedding gift and ends with a demolition order. The Crown rarely raises its voice. It does not need to. It simply changes the floor plan. 11:50, 6 p.m. The eviction came in early 2023, swift, clinical, and timed with unmistakable precision. Weeks after Prince Harry's memoir detonated across the literary world, King Charles III stripped the couple of their residency rights at Frogmore Cottage. The locks, figuratively speaking, were changed. But the walls remained standing. The floor plan survived. And with it, the faintest suggestion that something might yet be salvaged. That suggestion is now being demolished along with the yoga studio. What accelerated the timeline was, in a certain dark irony, nothing to do with the Sussexes at all. The catalyst was Prince Andrew. Palace officials had quietly identified Frogmore as the ideal solution to one of the institution's most stubborn internal headaches. Andrew, stripped of his public role, radioactive in the press, and still occupying the vast 30-room royal lodge, had been under sustained pressure from the king to downsize. Frogmore, compact by royal standards but entirely adequate for a man in his position, was floated as the answer. It was not accepted. Sources close to the negotiations describe Andrew's rejection as firm and categorical. In a series of tense talks that stretched deep into the spring of 2026, the Duke of York made his position clear. The property was too small and too poisoned by association. 3 years of headlines, of public fury, of Sussex mythology had seeped into the very brickwork. He wanted no part of it. And so the cottage sat, empty, guarded, accumulating cost and symbolism in equal measure. With its highest-ranking alternative occupant refusing to cross the threshold, the Crown Estate was left with a property it could neither fill nor ignore. The decision that followed was, on paper, purely pragmatic: subdivide, repurpose, return the building to its original function as staff accommodation. But pragmatism and symbolism are rarely strangers inside these walls. The institution recognized an opportunity, and it took it. What is now materializing at Windsor, the surveying equipment, the technical drawings, the quiet arrival of structural engineers, is simultaneously a property decision and a proclamation. The yoga studio will go. The open plan layout will be partitioned. The copper bathtub, the vegan paint, the soundproofed floors, every element of the world Harry and Meghan built inside those walls is being methodically removed. The Crown is not renovating Frogmore Cottage. It is expunging it. The message moving through palace corridors and splashed across British front pages carries no ambiguity. The clock is being reset. There will be no part-time return, no diplomatic foothold, no structure waiting in Windsor to receive them. The Sussex chapter within the geography of the British state is being closed, not with a statement, but with a sledgehammer. This is, in its way, entirely consistent with how Charles has chosen to govern. Throughout his reign, and through the sustained turbulence of this family crisis in particular, the king has operated according to a doctrine so embedded in royal tradition it barely needs naming. Never explain. Never complain. No public rebuttal, however incendiary the provocation from Montecito. No press conference, no interview, no direct engagement with the allegations that have flowed steadily westward across the Atlantic. Charles has absorbed it all in silence and responded through architecture. The authorization to dismantle the Sussex renovations requires no press release. It issues no statement. It simply acts, and in acting, speaks more loudly than any palace spokesperson ever could. It is sovereign authority exercised without drama, stripping Harry and Meghan of their last remaining point of institutional leverage on British soil. That same philosophy was applied with equal precision just weeks earlier, when the Duke and Duchess embarked on a string of international tours, most visibly, a heavily choreographed visit to Australia. The optics were deliberate. Enormous crowds, quasi-diplomatic engagements, blanket media coverage. The machinery of a state visit, assembled without the state. Charles did not respond publicly. He responded bureaucratically. Directives moved quietly from the palace to the Foreign Office and outward to British embassies abroad. The instruction was unambiguous. Harry and Meghan were to be treated as private citizens conducting commercial activity. No diplomatic support. No logistical assistance. No security coordination through official channels. The protective infrastructure of the British state, invisible when present, devastating when withdrawn, was simply removed. Their tour continued. But it continued entirely outside the sovereign perimeter, stripped of any legitimacy the Crown had not explicitly granted and would not now provide. That is how Charles fights. Not with words. With the quiet, absolute authority of institutional architecture and the will to use it. The demolition of Frogmore Cottage is not only an act of symbolism. It is a legal maneuver, and a devastatingly effective one. For years, Prince Harry has pursued one of the most consequential and closely watched legal battles in modern royal history. At its center, the right to taxpayer-funded police protection whenever he and his family return to British soil. The Duke has argued, repeatedly and at considerable personal cost, that elite state security is not a privilege he forfeited, it is a birthright. That his children, Archie and Lilibet, deserve protection that only the British state can fully provide. By authorizing the permanent subdivision of Frogmore Cottage, King Charles III has just gutted that argument from the inside. British security protocols are not simply bureaucratic. They are architectural. The provision of state protection for members of the royal family is intimately tied to residency within a recognized, secured royal perimeter. Remove the residence, and the legal scaffolding collapses with it. Without a permanent crown address inside the fortified bounds of Windsor, Harry can no longer claim the automatic institutional protection those walls represent. He is left on British soil, entirely dependent on private security firms, companies with no special legal standing, no emergency powers, and no sovereign mandate. The king did not argue this case in court. He simply removed the address. The timing has also delivered a second, quieter demolition, this one of rumor. For months, certain circles in London had been animated by whispers of something called Operation Thor. The theory, circulating through political and media corridors with surprising persistence, held that King Charles's deteriorating health and the monarchy's ever-shrinking pool of working royals had forced a rethink. That somewhere within the walls of Buckingham Palace, quiet preparations were underway for Harry's temporary return to official duties. A secret reinstatement, carefully managed, politically necessary. The structural engineers now working at Frogmore have answered that theory definitively. You do not get a man's home to prepare his return. The approval to demolish the cottage's interior, issued in the final days of May 2026, makes something else unmistakably clear. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace are not merely aligned on this. They are unified, resolute, and entirely without ambiguity. There is no hidden faction engineering a comeback. There is no political intervention waiting in the wings. There is only brick, mortar, and a decision that cannot be walked back. Which brings us to the figure whose fingerprints, many believe, are most visible on this decision. Prince William. As Charles has directed his energy toward managing his health, the day-to-day enforcement of royal discipline has migrated, quietly but unmistakably, toward the Prince of Wales. And William, those close to the institution confirm, has never wavered on his younger brother. Not once. Where the king has occasionally shown the faint tremor of paternal hesitation, William has remained a wall. He does not view the Sussex situation as a family dispute that time might heal. He views it as a structural threat to the integrity of the crown, and he has treated it accordingly. The erasure of the Sussex residence is, in no small measure, his victory. But it is also something larger than a fraternal conflict resolved in stone. It is a statement about the monarchy that William intends to lead, and the terms on which he intends to lead it. By taking so public and irreversible a step against his own brother, the Prince of Wales is drawing the boundaries of his future reign in the sharpest possible lines. The message radiating outward to every member of the House of Windsor is not subtle. Step away from the institution, and the institution steps away from you, completely, permanently, and without appeal. No hybrid arrangements. No commercial exploitation of royal titles. No historic properties retained as private retreats across the Atlantic. The era of part-time royalty is not winding down. It has been declared officially over. William's fury at Harry's security battle runs particularly deep. He has long viewed it, sources suggest, not as a genuine safety concern but as a logistical play, a legal mechanism designed to allow the Sussexes to move freely in and out of Britain, maintaining just enough royal proximity to sustain their commercial value in America. Every court hearing, every committee appearance, every headline about state protection keeps the Sussex brand tethered to the sovereign institution they left behind. By backing the total demolition of Frogmore Cottage, William has removed the board entirely. Even if a court were to grant Harry concessions, even if a government committee were to soften its position, there is no longer a sovereign base to return to. No address inside Windsor. No physical foothold within the perimeter of the British state. The gates have been locked, not by argument, not by public confrontation, but by the far more permanent authority of a structural decree. Whatever the monarchy becomes under William, it will be built on this foundation, lean, focused, and entirely unwilling to carry those who chose to leave. Not everyone watching the surveyors arrive at Windsor is moved by the symbolism. Some are simply watching the money. Britain in 2026 is not a country with a high tolerance for royal extravagance. The cost of living crisis has not loosened its grip, and millions of ordinary citizens, heating bills unpaid, grocery budgets stretched to snapping, have little patience for the spectacle of a historic estate being expensively unmade. The optics are, by any measure, uncomfortable. First, £2.4 million of public money to merge 5 homes into one. Now, further expenditure to reverse the process entirely. Tear it apart, put it back together, tear it apart again. To the average observer, It reads less like estate management and more like an elaborate, ruinously costly argument conducted in bricks. The Republican movement has been vocal. The headlines have been sharp. And the palace knows it. But the Crown Estate's internal justification does not begin with symbolism. It begins with vacancy. For 3 consecutive years, one of the most strategically located residential properties within the secure perimeter of Home Park has generated precisely nothing. No occupant, no utility, no return. Meanwhile, the Windsor estate faces a genuinely acute shortage of high-grade accommodation for the senior administrative, logistical, and security personnel upon whom the entire machinery of the monarchy depends. These are not ceremonial figures. They are the people who make the institution function, and they need to live close to where it functions. Subdivided back into self-contained staff units, Frogmore Cottage stops being a monument to a departure and starts being a solution to a problem. The palace can house critical personnel on site, reduce expenditure on external rentals, eliminate commuting costs, and bring a dormant asset back into active service. Framed this way, the new construction is not waste. It is correction, the long-term realignment of a property portfolio that was briefly, expensively distorted by personal circumstance. Whether the British public accepts that framing is another question entirely. But the institution is betting that a functioning staff residence generates far less fury than a guarded, empty mansion that exists solely as a monument to a family rupture. Practicality, in time, tends to quiet sentiment. For Harry and Meghan, however, the closing of Frogmore is not a matter of optics. It is a matter of identity and of money. This property was never simply a house. It was a sovereign anchor, the sole physical proof, embedded within the fortified geography of Windsor itself, of their continued connection to the British crown. It was granted by Queen Elizabeth II at the height of her reign, at the height of their popularity, as a direct expression of royal favor. That provenance was irreplaceable. No Californian estate, no Netflix deal, no global tour could replicate what that address represented: legitimacy, proximity, institutional belonging. Without it, they arrive on British soil as private citizens. Nothing more, nothing less. No sovereign perimeter surrounds them. No crown address underwrites their presence. The unique status they have spent 6 years carefully cultivating, neither fully inside the institution nor fully outside it, but always meaningfully adjacent to it, has lost its last structural support. And in America, where that adjacency was everything, the consequences are already being felt. The Sussex brand was built on a single, powerful premise: that Harry and Meghan had walked away from the most famous royal family on earth, but had not been cut off from it. That they remained, in some essential and commercially valuable sense, royal, British, connected. The deals, the documentary series, the speaking engagements, the carefully staged tours, all of it derived value from the perception that the crown still, however reluctantly, acknowledged their existence within its geography. Frogmore Cottage was the last hard evidence of that acknowledgement. Now the walls are coming down, and with them the argument. The Hollywood dream arrived with extraordinary fanfare. It is departing with considerably less. The multi-million-dollar entertainment contracts that once announced the Sussex reinvention, the Netflix deal, the Spotify partnership, the promise of a California-based media empire built on royal glamour and progressive authenticity, have largely stalled, collapsed, or quietly expired. What remains is an extraordinarily expensive lifestyle with a shrinking income stream to sustain it. The Montecito estate demands constant, eye-watering maintenance. The private security operation, elite, round-the-clock, entirely self-funded, generates an annual bill that would strain most corporate budgets. And the global appetite for Sussex content, once seemingly insatiable, has curdled into something closer to fatigue. The moment that crystallized this shift did not happen in London or Los Angeles. It happened in Geneva. Meghan appeared at a public event in Switzerland before an audience that, by credible accounts, contained barely 10 genuine supporters alongside a scattering of baffled journalists. For a woman who once drew crowds that stopped traffic, who commanded global headlines simply by stepping outside, the image was quietly devastating. Not dramatic enough for a public reckoning. Precisely small enough to be crushing. The commercial pivots that followed have told their own story. The sweeping Hollywood production ambitions have given way to lifestyle branding, luxury kitchen goods, wellness products, branded matchsticks. Each launch positioned carefully, received indifferently. The distance between where the Sussex brand once stood and where it now operates is not a gentle slope. It is a cliff edge, and the fall has been swift. The market, it turns out, understood something before the couple did. Without the history, the institution, the physical and sovereign backing of the British royal family, there is no unique product to sell. The appeal was never purely Harry and Meghan as individuals. It was Harry and Meghan as exiles from the most scrutinized dynasty on earth, still connected, still proximate, still carrying the weight of Windsor in their names. Strip away that connection, and what remains is a lifestyle brand in a market already saturated with lifestyle brands. Frogmore Cottage was the last thread. Now it too is being cut. And so we arrive at the end of the story, or rather, at the point where the story stops being a saga and becomes a verdict. What is happening at Home Park, Windsor, in the summer of 2026 is not a renovation. It is a ruling. King Charles III, operating with the quiet, absolute authority that has defined his response to this crisis from the beginning, has done what years of headlines, legal proceedings, and transatlantic negotiations failed to do. He has closed the file. Architecturally, institutionally, permanently. Prince Harry's legal campaign against the Home Office and the Royal and VIP Executive Committee will almost certainly continue. The Duke has shown no inclination to abandon it, and on a human level, the impulse is understandable. It is the last remaining lever he can pull within the British system. But the lever, as of this moment, operates in a vacuum. Even a court victory on security provision delivers him to a country in which he has no crown address, no fortified perimeter, no sovereign base. He would arrive in London as a private citizen seeking state protection for visits to commercial hotels and private rentals. The optics of that outcome serve no one, least of all him. The palace has not shouted. It has not briefed against him, not publicly. It has done something far more definitive. It has removed the board. What reverberates beyond this specific property, this specific family, is the broader signal now radiating through every corridor of the House of Windsor. The alignment between Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace on this decision is total. Charles and William, father and heir, monarch and future monarch, have arrived at the same place by different roads and with different emotional temperatures, but they have arrived together. The institution is not divided. It is not conflicted. It is not waiting. It is decided. And the decades ahead will be shaped by that decision. A leaner monarchy, a harder line, a crown that has demonstrated, in the most tangible possible terms, that proximity to its history, its assets, and its protection is not inherited indefinitely. It is earned, continuously, through service, or it is lost. The workers moving through Frogmore Cottage this summer are partitioning walls, reconfiguring floor plans, returning a grand house to a practical purpose. But in the longer sweep of history, what they are doing is simpler than that. They are turning the page. Prince William has made his position so clear and held it so long that it has ceased to be a personal stance and become something else entirely. It is now policy. Operational, institutional, crown-endorsed policy, the governing philosophy of a monarchy in transition, authored by the man who will one day be its king. The message embedded in the rubble of Frogmore Cottage is one that every member of the extended Windsor family would be unwise to misread. The reign of William V, whenever it arrives, will not be a place of ambiguity. It will not accommodate hybrid arrangements, commercial titles, or the quiet retention of crown assets by those who have abandoned crown responsibilities. The architecture of that future monarchy is already being built, and what is being demolished at Windsor this summer is as much a warning as it is a conclusion. Every detail being stripped from those walls carries its own quiet finality. The vegan paint, the copper fixtures, the yoga studio floor, each one a relic of a vision of modern royalty that the institution has decided it cannot afford, not financially, not reputationally, not strategically. They are being removed not merely to reclaim a building, but to ensure that nothing of that chapter lingers to complicate the next one. And the next chapter belongs entirely to the crown. Harry and Meghan, meanwhile, must now navigate terrain for which their particular skills were never designed. American celebrity culture is a brutal, oversupplied market with no loyalty to backstory and no patience for diminishing returns. The sovereign proximity that made them extraordinary, that made their story sellable, their brand fundable, their presence headline-worthy is gone. What remains are two private individuals in Montecito, talented and driven and entirely ordinary in the specific way that matters most to a market that once treated them as extraordinary. The lifestyle products will continue. The ventures will be launched and relaunched. The legal battles will grind forward through British courts. But the gravitational center of their story, the crown, the history, the perpetual possibility of return, has been physically dismantled and converted into staff housing. This is what the British monarchy has always understood, across centuries of personal crises, political upheavals, and family ruptures that would have destroyed lesser institutions. Individuals pass through. Personalities flare and fade. Dramas that consume a decade of front pages are eventually folded into a footnote. The crown absorbs it all and continues. What has been demonstrated at Frogmore Cottage in the spring and summer of 2026 is nothing new. It is the oldest lesson the institution knows, delivered once again in the language it has always spoken most fluently. Not words, not press releases, not public confrontations. Stone, mortar, administrative finality. The House of Windsor has closed this chapter the way it closes all chapters, quietly, completely, and on its own terms. The individuals at the center of the storm will carry their version of events wherever they go. But the institution carries something heavier and more durable than any individual version of anything. It carries time, and time, in the end, belongs to the crown.